Our first speaker is Professor Yosef Tavori of the Lander Institute, who will speak on the Aggadic history of Jerusalem.
Thank you. I think in line with Avigdor's statement, I should point out that Mechon Lander, the official name is Mechon Lander Merkaz Akademi Yerushalayim. So here we go for Yerushalayim. Good evening, Chag Sameach. It's a great privilege to address such a group on this festive day of Yom Yerushalayim. Whatever apologies I will make for my lecture, Avigdor has already made for me. And if I'm called to task, I'm sure his eloquence will defend me also. Avigdor told us that the text refers to Yerushalayim. We've read a text which refers to Yerushalayim as metropolitan, a metropolis, Ir Va'em. We know that Philo refers to Yerushalayim as the metropolis. And metropolis, Ir Va'em, means that the city is our mother. And in fact, it already appears in the prophets, who say that Yerushalayim will wonder, Mi yad ladli et eile, the people of Israel, the children of Israel, are the children of Zion and Yerushalayim. So therefore, it is perhaps appropriate that I should speak to you in my mother tongue. It's not, maybe we should also insist a little bit on Hebrew, but as I say, there's a play here on mother, so it's appropriate. Okay, we're going to talk about the history of Yerushalayim according to the Aggadah. And as you well know, Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Torah at all. The Torah tells us the God is going to choose some place, wherever it will be, and then it will be. But until then, nobody is supposed to have a clue of where this surprise is hiding for us. When the Tanakh tells us about the conquering of Yerushalayim and turning Yerushalayim into the capital of the city, so it tells us about David. And David captured a city which was until then sort of a no man's land. We have here maps of Yerushalayim, the biblical, in the times of Shaul and David. On the right, you can see a map of Eretz-ישראל, and you see over here is the city of Yevus, later to be known as Yerushalayim, which at that time was an enclave, a pagan enclave, which did not belong to the Jews. It wasn't settled by the Jews. And finally, when David took over and became king of all of Israel, he conquered this area. And the city of Yevus was now on the border, or it had always been, but it hadn't been Jewish. It was on the border between Yehuda and Ephraim or Binyamin. Now, scholars have pointed out that perhaps the reason that David chose this place for his capital city was because it was a no man's land. It was a sort of a neutral territory between the tribes of Judah and the tribes of Joseph. And just like every American knows that the District of Columbia was carved out as a sort of a compromise area between the North and the South, take a little bit from each one and make something new. Here they didn't have to take a little bit from each one because nobody had any of it. And so he founded his city of Jerusalem. And in fact, in connection with this thinking, they celebrated not too many years ago 3,000 years of the existence of Jerusalem, counting from the time of David HaMelech. So David HaMelech chose the city for his political reasons, for political considerations. And when he decided to build a temple there, or when he decided to sacrifice to God there, one of the angels told him to do it from the Goren, from the threshing floor of Aravna, the Jebusite. And you can see this in the handout. I quoted the verses in Numbers 1 to 3. So you can see really that there was no fulfillment of the promise of the Torah that the place that God will choose, that's where it's going to be. He doesn't tell them. He doesn't tell them that this is going to be the place. It's only David who builds it and selects it. Of course, the sages could not accept this. They felt that Jerusalem, even scholars don't accept it. I mean, when we discuss the existence of Jerusalem, 3,000 years, we're referring to 3,000 years of theoretically Jewish Jerusalem, at least if you count by the beginning and the end. But the city of Jerusalem, of course, existed long before that. So I said the rabbis could not accept this. The rabbis thought that the city of Jerusalem must have had significance long before the time of David, and they tried through Aggadic method to find within the Torah the basis for the selection of the city of Jerusalem for the Holy Temple. And we'll see that there were, we'll discuss three methods that they used, or three items that they discovered. One was they discovered that the name of Jerusalem itself is inherent in the Torah, it's hinted at in the Torah, so it wasn't just from the time of David. And the second is the history of sacrifice in Jerusalem. In other words, that the sacrifice did not begin with David's sacrifice on the threshing floor of Aravna of the Yevusi, but there was a long tradition of Jerusalem as being the place to sacrifice and worship God. And finally, the next one has to do with the Cosmogony of Jerusalem. I looked it up to make sure I pronounced it right. Which talks about how the world was created. In other words, the idea that Jerusalem is really a center of the world. It's the source from which the world was created. Now let's look at these issues in a little bit more detail. We will first start with the name of Jerusalem. If you look at your handout, number 14, there's a Midrash which is located in connection with the Aggadah, but it doesn't really have to do with the Aggadah. The Midrash tells us, based on the fact that Abraham, after the Aggadah, decided to name the place Hashem Yireh, or Yireh. So the Midrash says that God was now in a dilemma, because up to this time, God had two favorite figures. And here you see them on the screen in a painting by Dirk Boos, a 15th century painter, Dutch painter, who shows Abraham approaching Melchizedek. Melchizedek is offering him wine and bread. And you'll notice that Abraham is a little bit subservient to Melchizedek in this picture. There are other paintings who present the same meaning, and they put them more on an equal level. But for various reasons, Christian painters perhaps tended to see Abraham as being slightly lower level than Melchizedek, and that's the way he painted it. But God presented them as equals. And God said in this Midrash number 14, he said, I'm in a dilemma. He says, because what can I do? I have these two people whom I both love. I have Melchizedek, the king of Salem, the king of Shalem. And Shalem is an old city. It exists for a long time. I'm not going to wipe out the city. But now along comes Abraham, and he says it should be called Jeru or Yira or something like that. So God says, well, I'm going to make a compromise. And here you are. The new name of the city is now Jerusalem. Right? It's a singular form, not the plural form, but a singular form. So God has given the name of Jerusalem based on Abraham and Melchizedek. Now, I am not going to I'm not going to discuss political issues. But think about the implications of it. You know, that this very name of Jerusalem implies a compromise between two different cultures, perhaps united in the worship of God, but each one had his own way of looking at it, and God combined the two of them. Somebody once told me that Mitzrayim was, the name Mitzrayim was given after, was given after the Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt had combined, so that's why it has a dual form. So I replied to him that obviously Yerushalayim was given after the city was united in the Six-Day War, right? Because the dual form. But anyway, here we have the singular form, Jerusalem, and in English we still follow the singular form. We say Jerusalem and not Jerusalem. So that was the first method. The idea of Jerusalem, the name of Jerusalem is itself hinted in the Torah, and the name of Jerusalem is a combination based on biblical patterns in the Torah. We now turn to the history of sacrifice in Jerusalem. In other words, if you look at just the passages which tell about David, it looks like David inaugurated the worship of God on this mountain in Yerushalayim. However, already in the book of Chronicles, in 2 Chronicles, it said that Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. This does not appear in Samuel, but it does appear in Chronicles. In other words, here we have the first identification of the place where the temple is being built with Mount Moriah. And this is there's a double twist here, because the Torah does not refer to Mount Moriah. The Torah refers only to Eretz Moriah, and it says the place, the mountain on which the Aggadah will take place, is one of the hills. I'm not going to tell you which one until you get there, but it's one of the hills, and it never receives a name. Now here, the mountain has taken on the name, and the mountain is identified with the place in which Avraham sacrificed his son, or attempted to sacrifice his son. Notice that this gives the aspect of the Aggadah another significance. It now becomes a story to explain the founding of the temple. That here is the first place where a Jew tried to offer sacrifice to God, and therefore this place was to be sanctified and forever serve as the place of the temple. However, the rabbis did not stop with this, with just the identification of Abraham as the first sacrifice, but there were other sacrifices in Jerusalem. Noach, after all, it says in the Torah that he offered the sacrifices when he came after he left the ark. So they say he must have offered the sacrifices in Yerushalayim. Notice that for this they had to drag him all the way from Ararat, someplace in Turkey. They had to drag him all the way to Yerushalayim to offer the sacrifices, but they didn't have any problems with that. They were sure that if he was going to offer sacrifices, he was offering sacrifices in Yerushalayim. And you'll notice again that this insistence that Noach had done it before Abraham, that this place was no longer had been first sanctified by Abraham, but it goes back to an older, particularly non-Jewish tradition, that this was the place to worship God. Of course, besides Noach, we have Adam. And this is another little twist of the Aggadah, because the Torah doesn't say in any place that Adam had offered sacrifices, but they assumed Adam must have offered sacrifices, and if he did so, he must have done it in Yerushalayim. And here was a shorter journey, because if he left Gan Eden was right, the Petach of Gan Eden was right by Yerushalayim, so he didn't have to go far to offer the sacrifice. So we have Noach and Adam, and it's interesting that the Midrash, which identifies Noach and Adam as both sacrificing in Jerusalem, skips over two people who are mentioned specifically in the Torah as having offered sacrifices, Cain and Hevel, right? Sometimes I suspect that they didn't want to give an example of Cain and Hevel as being a source of sacrifice, but we'll come back to that. However, later Midrash, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, does include Cain and Hevel as the sacrifices, on the Mekom HaMikdash, at the site of the temple. And it's interesting when you compare the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer to Bereshit Rabbah, because Bereshit Rabbah starts from Noach and says Noach in the same place that Adam HaRishon, but Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says Noach in the same place as Cain and Hevel. Maybe they knew better what the word was coming to. Finally, I would like to point out one more attachment to Yerushalayim in the Torah, and that is Jacob. Jacob in Bethel. Here we have a picture taken from a manuscript of Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, showing Yaakov and the Sulam, the ladder, and Yaakov and the angels. Now, it's appropriate that this picture comes from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, because according to Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, not only was the location connected to Yerushalayim, in spite of the fact that the Torah says it was Bethel and Luz, but the stones which Yaakov took and became one stone was the Even Shtiyah. So here we have it really situated in Yerushalayim, and in fact, in a very graphic manner, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer portrays God as taking this stone, which had been before a whole bunch of little stones, but now they have become molded into one stone, and with his right foot pushing it into the ground as the side of an arch, the keystone of an arch. So this was the Even Shtiyah coming into the arch to support the world, to hold the world together. Now, ordinarily, when we talk of the Even Shtia as the start of the world, we think of it as at the bottom, at the foundation. But obviously, if the world had managed to exist from Adam Arishon until Jacob, so it wasn't the foundation that was necessary, but it was still necessary, and this is the last last stage in building any arch, right? You push in the capstone, the keystone, and that locks everything in place, and then everything will stay forever. So this Midrash introduces us into two themes, bringing the Even Shtia into Yerushalayim. The Even Shtia both as the centerpiece of the world and the support of the world. Now, the idea that Yerushalayim is the center of the world appears already. It has to do with the cosmogony of the world, the way the world was created, and it appears already in the book of Jubilees. And the book of Jubilees tells us that when Noach divided up the world, he had 3 children. So he divided up among his 3 children, Shem, Cham, Vayefet, and they divided up and they made a lottery. And lo and behold, Shem got the part that contained Jerusalem, and he was very happy about it. And he said, now he knew that really what he had said, blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and may the Lord dwell in the dwelling of Shem. This refers to the fact that Shem got Yerushalayim, and the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies, and the dwelling of the Lord, and Mount Sinai in the center of in the center of the desert, and Mount Sinai, the center of the navel of the earth. These three were created as holy places facing each other. So we have here the idea that Yerushalayim is the center of the world, and this appears also in a well-known map drawn by Heinrich Bunting in the 16th century. The world is a trefoil, and I'm not sure whether it's just by coincidence, because the trefoil was also, he writes, was also the symbol of his city, which he came from, and that's why he drew the map in this shape. But, yeah, anyway, here you see the world divided up between Shem, Cham, and Yafet. Here you have Shem taking all the right one, and Yafet on the left, and Africa on the bottom. And in the center is Jerusalem, which Bunting doesn't show so well, but it really should belong to the Nachalah, to the part of Shem. So we see here that Jerusalem was considered the center of the world. And of course, we've also introduced the Even Shtia. Now, the Even Shtia is mentioned in the Mishnah. There was a stone from the time of the first prophet, which is called Shtia. That's what appears in the Mishnah. But in the Tosefta adds that this Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi says, the earth was founded from it. Notice that the first opinion, which is the one recorded in the Mishnah, does not say that the world was founded from the Even Shtia. It was there from the time of the first prophets, whoever they were, possibly from the time of David. Ginsburg once argued that the Even Shtia is a meteor stone. In fact, he tried to say that the word Eshtia comes from Esh and it has to do with the meteor. But I asked, just to kill this idea, I asked an archaeologist, and he told me that the stone of the Even Shtia is absolute Jerusalem bedrock. And there's no doubt that there's no possibility that it is anything else. So we have here the two opinions in Chazal, in the Mishnah, in which they talk about Yerushalayim as being the Even Shtia, as being the foundation of the world. And here we have a view of the Even Shtia from inside, and here you can see it from on top. And here you can see it from the side, just to give you the idea of what Chazal said, that it is 3 fingers high above ground level. So here was the center of the earth from which the earth was created. Now, it has already been noted that the Even Shtia, or the idea of Shtia, has 2 possible meanings. One is the Shiti is the warp of a loom, and this is apparently connected with the idea which appears in Yerushalmi, that women did not cease from weaving during the days before Tisha B'Av, because the Even Shtia was cancelled. In other words, the Shtia is referring to the weaving, the warp of a loom, and therefore they didn't weave. On the other hand, we have Shiti as a foundation, and now we have to ask ourselves, if it was a warp of a loom, what type of a loom? So I'm going to show you 3 types of looms. This loom is a standard loom. It's a schematic form, but it's a standard loom. And the idea is that the warp itself is anchored at 2 ends, at both ends. And therefore, if you're going to talk about one of them being an anchor, being the anchor of the world, or the place where the world started, it's totally irrelevant to this type of a loom. However, There is another type of loom, and it's called a hanging loom, in which the top, only the top is connected. The bottom are tied with weights, and they sling them back and forth to do the weaving. So here, a scholar who wrote about this said, this is the type of loom that they meant. Here we have at the top, we have the foundation from which the world begins, and then he goes down and spins it and weaves it as much as he needs. However, the scholar who discussed this pointed out that if we accept this, that means that Jerusalem is not the center of the world, because the anchor of the loom, the top, is not the center, and the more you weave, the farther you get away from it. So therefore, I want to suggest that we're really talking about a third type of loom, a basket weave, right? The basket weave, the loom, the warp is put across like this, and then a woof goes around it like that to make a basket. And right over here, you have the center of the basket, which is the basis of the weaving, and it's also the center of the whole thing. And it's clear that Chazal were referring to this by the following midrash, which is found in the handout number 5 on the pasuk, I laid out gardens and groves in which I planted every kind of fruit tree. How could he possibly have planted every kind of fruit tree in Jerusalem? The climate is not appropriate for everything. So the midrash says what he did was, the Shlomo knew each sinew, each fiber of the weaving, where it went. So for instance, this one, he went to California, so he planted here, what grows in California? You tell me. And this one goes to China, so here he planted Chinese food. So that way he knew every one exactly where to plant it, but it was all centered in Yerushalayim. So the idea of a loom, of the loom as from which the world was created, does eventually mesh with the idea that Yerushalayim is the center of the world. And finally, I am going to look at, just for a short minute, the other meaning of shti, which is a foundation. And the shti foundation it deals with a coalescence of 3 different legends: the ceiling of the abyss, the navel of the world, the center of the world, and they all coalesce together in connection with this legend. It's a very interesting legend because it has a Greek parallel. They thought of Delphi as being the center of the world, the umbilical, the navel of the world, but we are not going to go into it, but instead I will show you that Jerusalem is still the center of the world. Here you have a PBS production about Jerusalem, and it's called the center of the world. So it's obviously correct, right? In fact, I was going to bring another picture, but it didn't work out. If you'll go to the crossroads down at the end of Krish Beit HaMishpat, you will see you'll look up and you'll see a sign that says 2 signs. One says begin north, and the other says begin south. So if you begin north and you begin south, that must be the center of the world. So Jerusalem, maybe it's not the navel of the world, but it is the center of the world, and it is certainly the heart of the Jewish people. Thank you.